Hello, everyone, and welcome to our public meeting for the Skinker Debaliviere Neighborhood Traffic Calming Study. Sorry, we're getting started just a few minutes late. Wanted to go ahead and introduce a few people that are here with us today, and then we'll talk about what this study is, and we'll go through our agenda for the meeting, and then kick it off into the technical portion. Initially, this study was identified in the Neighborhood Master Plan, which was approved in September of 2017. The recommendations that were part of this plan will follow the neighborhood plan that was adopted, and we're focusing on developing strategies for safety, connectivity, and speed. My name's Nicole Young. I'm with Lion CSG. I've been helping WSP on this portion of the project. And with us today are Eric Bothy, the project manager for Board of Public Service, Alderwoman Shameen Clark Hubbard from the 26th Ward, and Alderwoman Heather Navarro from Ward 28. And I know Heather wanted to say a few things.
Great, thank you, Nicole. I just wanted to thank everybody who has participated in the surveys up until now. It's unfortunate that we all can't be together, but I appreciate everybody's engagement in this process and your flexibility over the last several months. As Nicole said, this came out of the study that many of you participated in over the last, a few years ago. And I just think it's really great to see how the neighborhood came together, came up with the plan. There were some priorities identified in there, and the city is now working with the neighborhood, Skinker Debaliviere Community Council, Eric Bothy at BPS, to really keep this moving and to make sure that we see progress. I know Alderwoman Clark Hubbard and I often get calls about speed humps and stop signs and a variety of other things. And instead of piecemealing those requests, we thought it was really important just to come together and do a comprehensive look at the neighborhood and hear from as many of you as possible, and then start to strategize about what sorts of solutions we can implement and start putting numbers and a time period and some priorities on these issues. So thank you again to everybody who participated and everybody who put together this presentation. And I look forward to the future conversations that we will have coming out of this. So thank you, everyone.
It's really been great working with the Skinker Debaliviere Community Council and the other members from the neighborhood group that have helped in this, with Mike Reed as the executive director. So that's been really wonderful. From the technical team here with us today are Mike Doldy, the project manager. He'll be speaking during the technical portion, and Brian Robinson will be helping us with the Q&A portion. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention Jennifer Pangborn. She's a vice president with WSP. She's been very involved in multimodal transportation. She's a national expert that has been at every step on this project. She's focused on transit, bike, and ped, and she really has been an asset to St. Louis and specifically on this project. So with that, Mike, if we want to pull up the presentation. Okay. And here's our agenda for today. We're going to go through and talk about the survey and results and findings. You all had incredible participation for that. We'll go through the areas that we've found for opportunity, the tools that we're using, and then the preliminary recommendations. And as we go through this, there is a chat button. You can find it at the bottom of your screen for Zoom. As we go through the presentation, Brian's going to be recording the questions. And if there's something that we need to jump into, Brian will alert us, but we'll handle most of those at the end of the presentation. So please do click on that button and feel free to ask us anything about the project. And we also have a tool that we're going to utilize today called Mentimeter. It's a polling tool, and I'm going to let Mike talk about how we're going to use that.
Sure. So today, as Nicole mentioned, we're using Mentimeter. Mentimeter is an online polling application. It can be done on any device. You just go to the website www.menti.com, menti.com. And you can put in the code that you see on the screen, 6670934, and we include that number on any slide that we're going to do online polling in case you need to enter that in. But once you have it open, you should be able to follow along and answer questions. And as we ask questions, we'll be able to display live results from Mentimeter. And I see that some people are already completing the first question. That's going to be on the next slide. And we have a couple questions here just to get started, just so people can practice, and we'll show you those results. But we'll be using that throughout the meeting tonight. And then we'll be able to compile those results that will help us with our recommendations. And then we are also going to keep that open for the next 2 weeks for anybody that goes back and watches the recording online or downloads the presentation and wishes to contribute to the online polling. So if your neighbor or your friend couldn't make it tonight to the live meeting, definitely encourage them to go to the city's website and watch the recording or download that presentation that we'll provide after this, and encourage them to fill out, use the Mentimeter. Like I said, we'll keep that open for 2 weeks afterwards. And we'll work with BPS to make sure that's available to anyone. So the first question that we were asked, that I see some people already filling out, did you complete the Metroquest survey earlier this year? So if you go to, like I said, menti.com and put in 6670934, this will be the first question that you should come into. And in a few minutes, we're gonna review some of those Metroquest survey results. So just kind of curious if we have the same audience tonight as we did previously. And I will show you the results as they're coming in here. So here's our results as they're coming in on this question. So we actually have a good portion who are new tonight that will be providing some feedback to us, which is great. That's definitely what we want. But we are very appreciative of anyone that did take the previous Metroquest survey. I'm going to jump ahead to the next question. You should see this on the Menti. As we are thinking about this, we asked this question before in the Metroquest survey of, what is your overall comfort level regarding traffic safety in the neighborhood? And we talk about traffic safety, we're talking about when you drive through the neighborhood, when you walk through the neighborhood, when you walk with your family, if you're biking or if you're walking to a transit stop or to a transit facility. So you should see in your online polling a ranking from 1 to 5, I believe, for safe to unsafe.
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to chime in here. We got a couple of people who have asked us about chat being disabled on here, and I just wanted to give a chance maybe for somebody to respond to that. And I also was following along in Menti, and mine didn't seem to be working correct. So I just wanted to make us to verify that that Menti's working right. Sure.
Yeah, for the chat, I think we mean the Q&A that is a part of the Zoom platform. So the chat is turned off for attendings, but Q&A you can enter your questions.
Yeah.
I'm trying to check Menti here. So we got the first question. Looks like people. We might have to skip past this while we figure out that issue, so we can continue on with the presentation. So Nicole, you want to pick it back up? Apologize for the glitch there.
Sure, and as Mike said, that survey will be open for a couple of weeks here. We'll make sure that we get that up and running. Hopefully the next couple of questions will work. Those were just a couple test questions to get us used to answering the survey. There was a survey that was done at the beginning of this, and Mike is going to share a little bit more about that in the next few slides.
Sure, thanks, Nicole. So that Metroquest survey that we mentioned, we conducted that back early spring, end of February, and we did extend it a couple times into April 15th, which did extend into the beginning of the, the whole COVID pandemic and a lot of the shutdowns. But ultimately, we had a lot of good, unique responses to that Metroquest survey. It's something you can tell that this is a passionate neighborhood, when it comes to neighborhood issues, and specifically this traffic safety issue. Within that survey, we asked for comments, and people were able to place those on a map. We had nearly 400 of those comments, which is just kind of blew us away with the number of comments and how they were distributed all across the neighborhood, and really encompassed all the existing issues out there. In addition, we had a preference survey, and within that we had 71 comments. So altogether, we had over 400 comments that really helped us realize where the specific issues are in the neighborhood and what those are. And as you can see from this bar chart, speeding is definitely the #1 issue. It's something that we've gone out and we have observed ourselves. And it just really rose to the top on all the comments and throughout the surveys. And as you can imagine, when there's speeding issues, people don't feel as safe walking and biking. And then one of the other big issues that really rose to the top is the compliance of stop signs, especially 4-way stops, getting people to come to a complete stop at those and yield to pedestrians. That is definitely a big issue within the neighborhood. The preference survey results. So we looked at a few different types of infrastructure within the neighborhood, looking at intersections along roadways, in between intersections and mid-block locations, policy decisions, and then alleys. And as you can see, there's a couple things that definitely rose to the top. When we look at intersections, looking at speed humps to slow vehicles before they get there, definitely along roadways, looking at that, looking at anything to do with reducing the speeding, including when you look at policy, trying to increase enforcement. Enforcement's a tough one. It typically works when there's enforcement present, and when it's not, it doesn't provide that long-lasting effect. And that's why we're looking at infrastructure to try to create those natural habits of reducing speeds and increasing that stop sign compliance. And that's some of the things we'll be looking at tonight.
Hey, Mike, before you go on, I just want to make sure I've responded to a few people here, just making sure that Menti's working. I've kind of checked out the interface and I'm seeing that responses are going through to it now. So hopefully everyone has access, but.
Great. And real quick, I'm going to go back and show one of the questions we had asked earlier, we were going to try to ask earlier, was name something you love about your neighborhood, and we're getting some good responses to that. Okay, Nicole, you want to take it back?
Yeah, as we start talking about the areas of opportunity, we want to start with the area that we're looking at and define sort of the bounds of the study. The study area is defined as the neighborhood bounded by Skinker Boulevard, Delmar Boulevard, DeBaliviere Avenue, and Forest Park Parkway. It is limited to the area inside of those streets, not the border streets themselves. And as Mike said, there were over 400 comments. So on the next slide, we can show you how those were distributed. It's so great that we got so many comments. And you'll start to see pictures of the neighborhood as the presentation goes on. Our team here today really spent quite a bit of time walking through the neighborhood, getting to understand it, and really getting a feeling of how things are functioning on a day-to-day basis. So Mike, do you want to go ahead and start talking about these maps that we've prepared?
Sure. Yeah, so taking all those comments you saw, over 400 comments distributed across the neighborhood, we started to look at where we had those hot spots and where, issues started, kind of rising to the top, as I mentioned before. So first one we started to look at was that kind of the safety and mobility. That's number one, is safety. And what really rises to the top is along Waterman Boulevard. That is definitely a corridor that has a lot of speeding issues. This is also where we have multiple four-way stop signs, controlled intersections, and we definitely have that lack of compliance at those. The other big route, looking at DeBaliviere Avenue going north and south through the neighborhood, that's a very wide street. It lends itself to speeding, and that's typically what happens. We definitely see that. Some of the other issues, looking at, because of the way some of the one-way streets and the closures of the streets are configured, some people end up, and this is based on the comments we received, is people get in there and maybe get lost, maybe not know which way to get out of the neighborhood, and will either go the wrong way on a street. And when they do that, unfortunately, they are trying to get out as fast as they can, which leads them to, again, speed to get out. So we end up with some speeding issues on those one-way streets because of that. We did try to keep within the study area, but we did receive a lot of comments on the kind of those bordering major arterials around the neighborhood. So we took those into consideration. We're not going to be able to fix some of the issues along those streets, but we do want to make sure that as we're accessing the neighborhood, coming in and out of the neighborhood, that we do make sure we focus on safety of that. And that's why you see that some of these streets are highlighted on the outside, specifically the intersections where we have access. So, we all went out and we walked the neighborhood, took these comments, wanted to verify them and observe it for ourselves. And, they were almost all spot on. Just want to mention one, the upper left picture here is along Waterman. That's a four-way stop. As you can see, the striping for the crosswalks is very faded. It's an older style of crossing that in itself, even if it was striped well, wouldn't lend itself to be very highly visible. So that's an area where we don't see that compliance with the stop signs and then speeding up to the intersection. Again, you can see just from some of the pictures that, this is within the neighborhood, and we see some, some wide streets. And as traffic engineers, we know that when you have wide open streets and that are very straight, people just have a natural tendency to speed. So that's where we look at, changing that infrastructure to limit that. One of the other things that rose to the top in the comments, and this is something we didn't actually ask for in the Metroquest survey, but people volunteered the information, and it was about the connectivity of some of the streets that had been closed in the past. And it's something that we're gonna discuss a little bit later in the presentation, but most of it revolved around the streets across Rosedale that are currently closed for through traffic. And then there's a few other locations where either we don't have access out to Delmar, or we have some one-way streets that prevent some connectivity for either, connecting to either side of the neighborhood. And again, you can see here, there's the upper left is one of those kind of turnaround intersections on what would be Rosedale. And then some of the other pictures are just some of the entrances that have been blocked in the past that prevent full access to the neighborhood. We did ask about parking and loading. We didn't have as many comments actually as we expected when it came to parking and loading, but we did have some specific locations. This tended to be more down on the southern portion along Pershing. Some of this is due to some of the retail there at Skinker and Forest Park, and also, it's closer to Washington University, and you get some of those kind of day parkers. Some people may not be parking on campus, may be coming over here to park on the street, and we end up with some of those specific issues on those streets when it comes to parking. We also have some issues with lighting. Some areas that either the lighting may be blocked, or we don't have pedestrian scale lighting as people are walking. So it might be good if you're driving in a car, but if you're walking, you may not have well lit intersections to feel safe to cross, or even from a personal security. So starting to put all this together, we're starting to come up with some composite maps of what the existing issues are, and kind of overlaying that on top of each other to see where we can have opportunities. Nicole?
So now we're going to talk through some of the safety enhancements that we're considering for the neighborhood. There's a few categories of this. Most of these photos that you'll see in the next few slides are from other projects that have been implemented in the city of St. Louis. Each of the photos is associated with an address. We're really going to encourage you all to go out and see some of these after the presentation. And if you'd like to come back and give additional feedback through the Mentimeter, you're welcome to. We will have this, as we've said, on the website so that you can come back and look at the addresses for each of these. So we'll start off here with the intersection enhancements. The first, Mike, if you can go to the next slide. Here we go. The first photo here on the left is near St. Francis Park at Eichelberger and Donovan. And you'll see here just the newer style of crosswalk, some of the clearer painting that is happening here. And then I think Mike, did we?
So this would be actually the first one on the upper left is the one you were mentioning.
Okay. And then Taylor Avenue, Maryland, and the Central West End has these bump outs that helps to slow the traffic and really gives a more neighborhood feel, creates more improved compliance within the neighborhood, and just really provides more of a place making, if you will.
And the one thing to note on this Skinker and Clayton, this is something that a signalized intersection, and it was recently upgraded by the city. And again, as Nicole mentioned, it's using the more highly visible type of crosswalk, just like on the right side, which is also by Francis Park. So more of a neighborhood feel, but using that same type of striping.
More intersection enhancements with improved lighting in the Shaw neighborhood, and also in Central West End. You'll see some of the different style of lighting that can provide more of a neighborhood feeling. And then as we move into the next segment, we call these mid-block enhancements. On the left here, you'll see a mid-block crossing that's located in Forest Park. And that just allows us to give the neighborhood more access points to cross the streets, helps to slow traffic, and really allows for a more controlled speed at the intersections. On the right here, you'll see one that's in the Central West End. I think a lot of people know this location, just at Maryland and Euclid. But again, it provides a different material and texture, and then provides a little more visual aesthetic to the crossing itself. Sorry, I think my feed is running a little bit slow here, but a couple more photos in Tower Grove. The left one is on Connecticut, just west of Grand. And then the right photo here is Tower Grove South at Oletha at Lucy Street. These are both speed humps And we know there have been a lot of questions about speed bumps versus speed humps in St. Louis. We are not allowed to have speed bumps because of the snow plows. So we really try to utilize these speed humps that have a little bit wider profile to control speed between the intersections. Just provides that obstacle to reduce speeds and give the visual cue to drivers to slow down. I know the word road diet tends to frighten some people, but really what we've seen in providing some road diets in St. Louis is that it doesn't impede the flow of traffic, but does improve the safety quite a bit. It slows cars down, but allows them to get through the intersection faster, actually, in narrowing those lanes of travel, and it actually shortens the crossing. So it additionally helps to prioritize other modes of traffic, such as pedestrians and bikes. Mike, did you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Sure, and I think you mentioned it. You know, by having the curbs brought in, when we say road diet, it's a narrower road, especially at intersections, and that makes, as you said, the crosswalk shorter. So that's less exposure for someone that's crossing the street. It would take less time for them to cross the street. It's less distance, and it allows us to also have more of a highly visible crosswalk, and it's a visual clue. You know, as you come to an intersection, if it's narrowed, that you're more likely to see that visually, that it is an intersection and that you do have crosswalks. So it's just kind of, as Nicole mentioned, it's safer all around, but definitely for pedestrians with that shorter crossing, that's less exposure out in the middle of a street, especially for your most vulnerable users, you know, your kids and elderly and anybody that just takes a little bit longer to get across.
And then there's a couple of areas that we are really looking for some feedback from the neighborhood on two-way conversions and opening access. We know these can be a pretty big change for the neighborhood, but it does improve neighborhood connectivity and reduces compliance issues. Here you'll see the photo at Kingsbury, right at Nina and DePere. And you know, this is an area that we've really been considering to alleviate traffic pressures. We talked to some of the neighbors in this area and talked to people that had been there before the transition was made to close this street. And it seems that, you know, there's the original concept wasn't fully implemented for this intersection. So we've been looking at ways to improve access here. And there's some other roads in the neighborhood that we're considering for two-way conversion as well. Mike, do you want to talk about that for just a moment?
And one of the things to mention with this, and this is something that came out of the comments, is that because of a couple of the one-way streets, you actually get a lot more people using the alleyway to go the reverse of the one-way street to get where they're trying to go. So it actually creates more of a compliance issue. And as those people use those alleyways, again, they probably have a natural feeling that maybe they shouldn't be doing it. And so in order to get through there as fast as they can, they speed through the alleys. And in this area, there's actually an alley that has a sharp curve in it. So you get a lot of people, you know, speeding around that curve and then speeding through the alleyway. And that's not where we want people to even be, you know, unless you're back there, you know, for your own property or, you know, for utilities and trash, that kind of thing. So, you know, that's why we would be looking at two-way conversion, is to improve some of that compliance of some issues that happened with the way that it's set up right now. And then also in addition is to improve that connectivity so that you do take some of the load off, you know, a street that might be getting all of it right now and spread that out a little bit.
And then we have showed some of the photos of the increased crossings and high visibility crossings. This is really a focal point. There's so many people out in the neighborhood walking and biking that enhanced sidewalks would really do a substantial amount to increase safety and connectivity for the neighborhood. These are just a couple, one shown in Lafayette Square and the other near St. Francis Park. St. Francis Park went through some crossing updates a couple of years ago, and they really have done a great job in that area. So we're using it as an example of something that's been implemented in St. Louis that you might be able to drive down and see the area around St. Francis Park and how it might help to improve Skinker Debaliviere neighborhood. And then gateway elements are something that we've looked at to just improve the neighborhood feeling and show that it establishes the neighborhood entryways to really provide that feeling of a place that this is a neighborhood that has, as we said, the walkability, the access to transit and bike paths, that there's going to be people out walking about, that we're going to expect you to slow down and really make sure that we're building that neighborhood brand and character that you all expect within Skinker Debaliviere.
And definitely, this is something that would be probably done, after some of the more critical improvements that we've talked about. But it is something that Nicole mentioned, that it's an entry into the neighborhood that gives you that sense that you're entering a residential area. And we know a lot of people, and I'm sure, anybody that lives along Waterman would know that that is, used frequently as a cut through street, maybe to avoid Forest Park Parkway or Delmar. So the purpose of the gateway elements would be to say, this isn't just a cut through, it's a residential neighborhood that you're entering, more of a visual clue to try to bring down that speeding issue.
Hey, Mike, just since you happen to be on the subject matter, one of the questions that we have queued up here, a couple people have mentioned or sort of doubled down on it. And the question is, how do you, can you validate the hypothesis that speeding is a result of confused drivers trying to exit the neighborhood? This idea of a cut through, is that a guess on your part, or do we have data to back that up, or how are we sort of basing our decisions on that?
It's a good question. Most of that was based on comments that we received along those streets, and it wasn't, just one. It was definitely a grouping of comments from multiple respondents to the survey, and also just personal observation out there. If we do look further to improvements on those streets, the city would likely require us to collect speed data on those and try to, use that data to back up that hypothesis. But that is a good question. For right now, it is somewhat of an anecdotal or subjective feel to that.
And this is the last enhancement that we'll talk about, the open access. And after this, just to give you a bit of a preview, we are going to have some more polling about these options for improvements. And then Mike is going to talk about some locations where we're considering these. So you will actually see within Skinker Debaliviere where we're considering opening up access, where we're considering putting two-way conversions. And this is just a photo down at Laclede's Landing. You may be aware that they opened up North 2nd Street there. Lucas Avenue at North 2nd Street. And it's really been transformational for connectivity into Laclede's Landing. I am just a few blocks from here right now. And that neighborhood, was always really hard to get into Laclede's Landing and created a lot of confusion and people going different routes to get down into the landing, whereas opening up Lucas Avenue has really created a place and sort of a central entryway right there into the neighborhood at Laclede's Landing. Let's see. Next, I think we're going to move on into polling. Brian, has that hopefully hopefully we've been able to get the questions.
It looks like
result-
people are filling out that question. So at least some people
Yeah,
are on
yeah.
that.
So, the next question here is just kind of thinking through the options. So when you consider all of these enhancements, is there one that you would like to see implemented first?
And I'll start to show the results. And, we're talking at the things we just mentioned again, just to kind of repeat, is we're looking at improved crosswalks, intersection improvements, improved lighting, speed humps, mid-block crosswalks, road diets, two-way conversion, enhanced sidewalks, those gateway elements, and then opening up some connectivity. So we're getting some good answers on that one. We'll give everybody just a few seconds to, if they want to complete that question. I'll go to. So we'll jump into preliminary recommendations. This is based on everything we've shown tonight of where we receive feedback through the Metroquest survey, where we see areas of opportunities, the type of treatments that would make the most sense for these types of streets, and that are also have been successfully implemented in other locations in the city. So again, we'll use the polling a lot as we go through this section. So just for anybody that maybe didn't catch it in the beginning, if you would like to complete the online polling that we've been talking about, you can go to www.menti.com. This is a simple website you can use on any device. When you go to that, the first screen will show you asking for the code. The code is 6670934. And it should take you, if you enter now, it should take you to the question that we're on that we just completed.
So we've had a few people, Mike, say that their response has not come up when they've tried testing it. So this will be the test of all tests here. I think it's important to note that it's going to be open for a couple weeks
Sure.
as well.
Yeah, and we apologize for any technical issues we have. It's one of virtual meetings these days. So we're going to show you some draft enhancements of locations of improvements, and after each one, we're going to ask a couple questions. And we'll hopefully everybody can start to get into that. So definitely looking at the neighborhood and looking through the comments and the areas of opportunities. Intersections is something that I think has the most area for opportunity and can provide the most impact when it comes to safety, especially when we talk about walking through the neighborhood and biking. And really where that comes into play is where we have those four-way stop signs. And what we'd be looking at there is those improved crosswalks, the highly visible crosswalks, some spot lighting improvements, and also those intersection improvements where maybe we narrow the roadway at the intersection to give that visual clue again of that it's an intersection, to increase that compliance with coming to a full stop and yielding to pedestrians. So with this, we'll ask, based on the previous map, which I'll go back to here in a second, rank how satisfied you are that the study is addressing the issues at the intersections. So based on this map, and let me enable that question. So we're getting some responses on that. That's good.
Good.
We'll give that a few seconds. I'll show you the next question is, oops. Is there any recommendations regarding intersections you would like to add? Is there any intersections that you feel are not included on this map, or is there any other type of improvements at these intersections that you would like us to study and to possibly recommend? And it looks like we're getting a couple of responses on that one too. We'll just give that a few seconds for everybody to fill that one in. Before we go there, I'll show just real quick that, yeah, we're getting some good responses on there, some different intersections, and some people in agreement, some things we can add. So good feedback here. We definitely appreciate all of it. So next, talking about the mid-block enhancements that Nicole had previously talked about. So definitely, we see the speeding issues along Waterman. Looking at, those mid-block treatments, these could either be pedestrian crossings because these are long blocks, long ways before you get to an intersection where you have a crosswalk. So either adding that mid-block crossing, or possibly, at a minimum, add a speed hump in the middle there. The location between Skinker and Rosedale is a unique one. When we did our observations, that was torn up for a while with I think some utility work. That little construction zone actually acted as a natural mid-block enhancement as it slowed cars down as they traveled over the construction zone. So that's what we would be looking at for some of these improvements. Other thing to mention on this one is on the one-way streets coming into the neighborhood with Westminster and McPherson. Our thought is, if the data shows, the further need that need to be studied, but include speed humps on the streets that are coming in, so that as people enter the neighborhood, they know that this is a place where, residents are concerned about speed. Put that speed hump to make sure that they slow down. If it continues to be a problem coming around the intersections on Kingsbury and Washington in the future, that's something that could be 2 more locations for speed humps. But our initial recommendation would be to add them on the entry points to the neighborhood. Again, DeBaliviere is one that we saw just a lot of comments where people are going from, the top of the neighborhood down to the southern side and speeding down between there. And then we also get a lot of people on the section from Laurel over to DeBaliviere on Waterman. That's just a nice, straight, wide open shot. And there's a definite speeding issue from the comments, and that also has been observed. So it'd be another section where we want to have some kind of treatment.
Mike, I just want to interrupt just because we're kind of going through these tools. There was a question regarding the understanding of what an improved intersection included and whether or not it included improved crosswalks.
Yes, that would definitely be as part of it. It could be separate. It could be done first as just the improved crosswalk, or it could be done with additional intersection improvements where we talk about narrowing the roadway widths and doing some other treatments on the corners. But ultimately, the crosswalks is what would be one of the main focus points on that. So next question, rank how satisfied you are with addressing the issues and concerns at the mid-blocks in the neighborhood, similar to the first question we asked. And then the next question would be, are there any recommendations, again, for those mid-block locations? We can fill out both of those.
Mike, do you want to go back to that map? I think it was helpful to have that up during the polling.
Yes. And we're going to provide these maps again through the city's website. We know that during a public meeting like this, you know, that it's, you know, you get a quick glance at something and you may want to study it further, or, you know, look into, you know, your street or a street that, you know, there's a concern on. So we'll provide that afterwards too. But this is definitely beneficial, getting some of the feedback through the polling. And it looks like we're getting some good responses on that one too. Next, when we talk about roadway, this is, you know, slightly different than the mid-block and intersections. It's in between the intersections, but looking at it from curb to curb, this would be the road diets that were previously mentioned, or possibly the two-way conversion there on Kingsbury. The one on Laurel Street, that's actually one that was recommended in the neighborhood plan that was previously adopted. And the way that was written into that plan is that when either side of Laurel Street was redeveloped, it would be on that developer to provide enough space to provide a two-way cross-section for Laurel Street in order to get that better access out to Delmar Boulevard. And again, the one on Kingsbury is in order to avoid the alley that goes behind the houses on Kingsbury. And then the road diet on DeBaliviere, as we showed in one of the pictures earlier, is just that really wide straight road. It doesn't get nearly as many cars as we saw parked on either side of the street. So it feels wider than Waterman, but definitely both streets get the speeding issue. And then also looking at the bridge crossings, you know, with the Metrolink tracks that separate the neighborhood, looking at improving those crossings so that it is an easy experience if you're walking or walking your family as you cross those bridges, that you have that feeling of safety and that you're separated from vehicles. And we'll move to those questions. Same questions as being for how satisfied you are that we're addressing the right issues and concerns for those roadways. And are there any recommendations regarding roadways that you would like to add? And I'll go back to that map here in a second. The three that we've mentioned so far, the intersections, the mid-block, and the roadway, those are really the top priority with the most impact for safety. The next couple that we'll go through are somewhat secondary and complementary to these, but these would be the main focus as we are looking at a traffic study to improve safety throughout the neighborhood. And we're getting some good feedback on those. Just to show real quick some of our results again, just so you can see what we're collecting. I see one of the comments here about the Metrolink bridge at Hamilton, and we are working with BPS and the designer on that bridge to incorporate some of the same type of improvements, and I believe they've already, you know, have some of that in there of something that we were going to recommend. So that's good to see, and it's something that the city does take into account on, you know, most new projects, is trying to incorporate that in. So, and it's something that one of our recommendations is when the Waterman Bridge gets replaced in the future, that they also do the same improvements that Hamilton Bridge gets. So next we look at, I mentioned, you know, some of the supporting enhancements, and that's when we talk about those gateway elements, those entrances to the neighborhood. One of the other things that we've included on this map is somewhat of a gathering place, or just one of the the big ones that came out was at Greg Freeman Park or Four Corners Park here at DeBaliviere and Kingsbury. That's not a very safe intersection to cross. We keep coming back to, DeBaliviere being a wide road with a lot of speeding. If we can do something at that intersection, that also improves that park there. And it's a great kind of centrally located gathering place for residents in the neighborhood. One of the other areas we'd be looking at similar to that is the triangle there at Waterman, DeBaliviere, and Laurel. Right now, out in that triangle, it has some things, but you can't get out to the triangle. Something that we recognize is, it's not very safe to cross any one of those streets to get out there. So looking at, how do we reconfigure that intersection, create something that is a gathering place and a meeting place for friends and people that are walking to stop and talk to each other, while also supporting the idea of improving safety at that intersection. So how does it play together hand in hand? So again, looking at the same two questions here, rank your satisfaction with including those supporting enhancements to go along with the top three, which is the intersection, the roadway, and the mid-block treatments. And then is there any other recommendations or locations that you would like to add to our map? All right, let's move on to connectivity. And this is one that definitely, as we mentioned before, came out of that Metroquest survey. People saying that we should definitely be including this when we study traffic and safety throughout the neighborhood. They want the streets back open. Obviously, there's going to be pros and cons with that. That's something that needs to be discussed and studied further. But it's something we wanted to gauge tonight is, do we want to keep studying that further? And specifically, looking at the intersections along Rosedale, and then including some of maybe a connection out to Delmar at DeBaliviere that's right now closed. I would mention here at Westminster and Kingsbury, we know that right now that's gated off. We're not recommending, or we wouldn't recommend opening that up to vehicles, but the initial recommendation would be to somehow open up that fencing to allow pedestrian access in and out of the neighborhood, that section of the neighborhood. But obviously that is open for, for feedback. And then there's another little section here of Nina Place that's cut off that would be included in this. But then when we talk about on the previous slides, the gathering places and that kind of placemaking, we don't want to lose that if we were going to recommend opening these up. So any improvements would include some type of feature to limit any speeding. We don't want to create the issues that we already have on other streets by opening these up. We also don't want to remove the gathering places and meeting places that we know people use. There's basketball hoops along some of these, we know kids play, so we wouldn't ever want to look at taking that away just to open up vehicle access, but is there a way to create opportunities for both of them? So based on just the comments in the Metroquest survey, asking us to address the issue, are we addressing it? Are we looking at it in the right way? And then is there any recommendations for that? And then this one actually has a third question. If you're open to the opportunity of providing more connectivity and opening up some of those streets, are you open to a pilot project, maybe testing that? And if so, what do you believe is the best location for that pilot project? So we'll give a few seconds for everyone to answer those two questions before we move on. Brian, is there anything else that we would need to address that's been coming in, or can we wait until the?
I've been trying to push them in. I'm sort of researching a couple of them. They were talking about certain areas, but
Sure.
not at this point.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of good specific locations in this polling. So.
Yep, I was just looking at the one on Nina.
So I'll show this real quick. It's these are filling in a lot, so
yeah, that's great.
Happy to see that. It's always good to work with residents who are passionate about their neighborhood, even if there's healthy debate on improvements or a sensitive issue like connectivity. So. We're gonna. It brings us to kind of pull it all together, looking at the neighborhood as a whole with all these improvements and different recommendations, and how does it all work together to improve neighborhood safety. So we started to put together this draft composite map. This will be obviously updated as we take into account feedback of those specific locations, but looking at trying to distribute improvements across the neighborhood to adequately address issues and make sure that we don't push any issues to other streets from where they are now. That's definitely our goal. I just opened up the question about the pilot project for the connectivity. So some people are just now filling that in. Give it a second before moving on to this next question. Okay, just open up the question for looking at what have we shared that you're most excited about, that you think would improve, have the biggest impact on safety. And obviously, different improvements are going to have different budgetary constraints and different costs. And that's something that we're going to be looking at as part of our recommendations. And we're going to be looking at short-term improvements, low-cost improvements that can be done first, and then also longer-term improvements that maybe are corridor long, corridor wide, that kind of all work together. So, but what's the one thing that you would be most excited about to see that would improve traffic safety in the neighborhood? And I'll go back to the map, looking at where all of our composite enhancements are overlaid on top of each other. We're getting a bunch of responses on this one. So, thankfully, I think we got over some of the hurdles with the technology initially, Brian.
That's good.
Thanks for notifying me on that.
Sure.
We'll continue to let people fill those in. Nicole, do you want to wrap up before we moved into answering some of the questions?
I think,
Sure.
oh, sorry. I think this one was tied a bit to what you said a minute ago, and this is probably my fault. I didn't quite see it. But when you're talking about enforcement, I understand that you might have temporary impacts, but was wondering if more visible enforcement could reduce crime.
Crime or traffic safety?
I'm seeing reduce crime according to the question here.
Okay.
And we can let someone ask a question at the end. Maybe that might be the way to do it, is let them ask the question at the
Sure.
end.
And I'll say, you know,
Leave that one on here.
through some of the comments, we did have comments regarding either personal security or criminal activity, and we did pass those along to the city and to the alderwomen, but we did try to focus on traffic safety. Sorry, Nicole.
All right, this is great discussion. I know enforcement's a conversation we've had internal to the team. We're trying to focus on engineering controls, but it is one of those tools that we do have available to us. You know, as we've gone through this tonight, I hope you all have seen that we really are looking at focusing on the improvements in the neighborhood. This presentation is going to be available on the website. Polling is going to be open for 14 days. Please do share this with your neighbors. You guys have been really phenomenal in providing responses that are meaningful to this study. So please continue to do that. And I know we're going to open things up for questions here, and we've got some time to spend on that. So I'll, Brian, leave it to you to kick that off.
Well, we don't have 3 questions in the queue, so I'm going to encourage people right now to go ahead and open it up a little bit more to questions. We tried to answer them as we went, but I think we should. I'm maybe going to ask Andy if he can let Tracy Graneman, who's on here, ask a question. She asked a question, and we wanted to get a little clarification. Is that going to be possible? I'm asking Andy there.
We also have somebody that raised their hand too, I believe.
Oh, I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing any hand raises, guys. So.
Oh, this is Tracy. Can you hear me now?
Hi. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. My question is around enforcement. I understand there would be temporary benefits from a traffic perspective, but I was sort of curious, you know, some of these issues are interrelated. So if we have more traffic enforcement or presence from police, or would there also be secondary benefits to reduce crime, and sort of an overall, like, how much do you look at the interrelated issues? I know your study's specific to traffic, but are there ways we could leverage resources like cameras or police to both manage traffic and enforce traffic concerns, and then also maybe some other neighborhood concerns?
I think definitely. You know, we as traffic engineers, one of the things we sometimes say is it's about the 3 E's: engineering, enforcement, and education. And those kind of all work hand in hand, and you can't just have one without having the other 2. So enforcement always is a critical piece of this. And I agree with your sentiment that, you know, it would kind of cover 2 issues that you may be having in the neighborhood. I think it might be a good question. I don't want to put either alderwoman on the spot, but if they wanted to provide any comments to that, I could, you know, I can open it up to you.
This is Heather Navarro. I guess all that I would add is that I think there's a bigger conversation to have here. The Skinker Debaliviere Community Council does have a safety and security committee that meets outside of COVID, I guess I should say. And there's always an opportunity there to talk about more of these questions. They definitely are interrelated, and we're working on those issues from that angle. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up, and we'll continue to do some of those things, like I said, through the security committee meeting and other ways.
Thank you. Okay, so maybe we'll run to the next one, and then we got two people with their hands up I'm seeing. Maybe we can take a question. But one of the questions was about, I realize that you're talking a lot about traffic safety, but I think enhanced lighting is very important as well. Mike, do you want to touch on lighting and how that's been considered?
Sure, and it is, as you can see from our composite map, there is a couple specific locations where we are including it as it relates to traffic safety. One of those being at Skinker and Waterman at the intersection. There's certain movements when you go through that intersection that are not as well lit as other corners or other areas of the intersection, and that creates issues for people turning, and it also creates a lot of issues, safety issues for pedestrians that are in that crosswalk who may not be seen by vehicles. So that's a big issue for us. Another one that was identified through comments and that we observed was at Kingsbury and DeBaliviere. Again, that's a big intersection. It isn't that well lit. And if we do want to make that a nice place for people to gather, lighting would be applicable there. Outside of that, it might be a bigger city issue as you look for lights to be replaced with LEDs that are more effective than maybe some of the older style lights. Some of the other comments dealt with specific issues, either in alleyways or certain places where it was more of a criminal aspect or a personal security, like I said, through the alleyways, and that might be somewhat out of our study, but definitely anything we're receiving in that regard, we are passing along to make sure that it doesn't, we're not disregarding it, but passing it along to the appropriate parties.
Great. So, okay, so we got a couple people's hands raised. So I'll just go ahead and sorry here. We have Derek and Billy Morgan. I'll go ahead and unmute them, which I think they may now be unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
So our question is around the excessive speeding up and down Laurel. We live right at the corner of Laurel and Westminster, and we see lots of speeding, lots of people going the wrong direction on Laurel. Today we had a police chase up and down Laurel and around through the neighborhood. How are you going to stop it? I mean, it is one of these days, a kid is going to get hurt, or a family member, or somebody who is going to the school. We're right there at a school intersection, and people go the wrong way and they speed. So what's the plan?
That is definitely a big concern. That is an area that we looked at. Looking at the composite map, the first easiest thing you could do is speed humps. I know they don't completely solve the problem, but when it comes to speeding, they are effective and used throughout the city. So, very short term, low cost improvement. That's definitely the first thing you can do. Some of the other things we looked at along there is providing some of those mid-block crossings, and not so much that there's a huge need to cross the intersection, but it's a piece of infrastructure that breaks up longer blocks and can be used visually to bring in the curb so the street is narrower and prevent some of that speeding. We always know it's kind of the wider the street, the more speeding you have. If you constrict people, they naturally have to slow down to get through. So that is partially for the reason for some of the mid-block crossings, in addition to providing some of that connectivity. But to answer your question, I think the first thing you could do is those speed humps in that location. And then also, going back to the enforcement, enforcement there could be very effective during school hours. When you have children out, coming to school or leaving school, that can be very specific enforcement that might be a little bit easier to identify, exactly when to be out there. So.
Okay, let's see. We have a question about a very specific area that at Kingsbury, Nina, in Kingsbury exactly what, and it's related to its two-way travel proposal. Do you want to maybe touch a little bit on the possibility of that, Mike?
Sure, and that's one where we see either people using that alleyway to go, I believe westbound, is Kingsbury is eastbound only, or we do see a lot of people, because it's a short block, we see people just going the wrong way. So it's something we wouldn't want to keep encouraging. You know, the one way doesn't seem to be effective if people are not complying with it. So our feeling is somewhat that not to allow the bad behavior, but to control it so that we do prevent some of those compliance issues. And that was one of the small blocks that we were looking at converting back to two-way to allow people to make the movement they're trying to do, so they maybe stop using the alleyway or stop using some of the streets in the reverse of the one-way.
And Mike, if that was an option, we'd need to look at that more specifically to come up with the exact improvements that we were going to do there to make sure that they worked with the rest of the neighborhood.
Correct. Thanks. And part of that too would be looking at, you know, either end of looking at those intersection improvements so that we limit the speeding you might have by opening that back up. So by doing some of the intersection improvements on either side, try to limit that issue that could arise.
Okay, so we have a hand raised, Richard Bose.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering, is painting the pavement at all effective, or do you have to really go to the expense of pouring concrete to make bump outs? Or
As Nicole showed, that's a good question. As Nicole showed from Francis Park, they did a lot of their improvements by those highly visible painted crosswalks, and that can be very effective, and that can be a great short-term, low-cost improvement. Especially, you know, you can do that and then see how it works, and if, you know, everybody really likes it, then you can always look in the future of, you know, going to that next step of, you know, bringing in those curbs and making that narrower. But definitely paint by itself can be very effective if used correctly. And we do have those examples throughout the city where they've done that.
Okay, let's see. We have another one here from Tom and Kathy. Most of these streets are pretty narrow. How could two-way traffic happen without smashing into parked cars or people? Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot on that one.
That is part of what Nicole mentioned, is that we would have to do some further study on some of those segments to make sure that, you know, we do have that proper width for two-way traffic. You know, we don't want to encourage people to go down a street that are going to end up, you know, scraping other cars or damaging other cars. So that is a limiting factor on that. Some of the other roadways we looked at, you know, are pretty wide and can handle parking on both sides plus two-way traffic relatively easily. You know, thinking about DeBaliviere Avenue, is one. But the two-way conversion is somewhat limited to those specific locations, short blocks. The one up on Laurel Street, like I mentioned, would only be done if one of those corners was redeveloped by a developer, and it'd be, I believe, part of that neighborhood plan recommended that the developer would have to be responsible for providing enough width for that two-way conversion. It wouldn't be done with the existing roadway in that section. So it's a good question.
Just sort of looking through here. We have a question about access at Rosedale and Delmar. How would you prevent people from using the neighborhood as a shortcut, essentially? So if these streets are opened, how do we reduce the impacts of that, or at least mitigate it?
You said at Rosedale and Delmar?
That was the specific intersection. I assume it applies to a lot of them, though.
And we do have somewhat of a policy issue at Rosedale trying to open up to Delmar. There is a small section just north of Washington that was actually vacated by the city and given to, I believe, condos or apartment buildings for parking. So the likelihood of that being able to be opened up to Delmar is very low. More likely would be DeBaliviere, and DeBaliviere would make more sense from a connectivity issue going from north to south.
I want to just say, Mike and Jennifer and I stood at that intersection for probably 20 minutes talking about how to prevent that from being a cut through. And we talked about providing, you know, bump outs there and making sure that, you know, there were no entry signs or one way, or we thoroughly discussed that. And those will all come through. If we do look at providing access there, we'll want to study that further and make sure that we're really considering making that a neighborhood connection and not a connection from Delmar.
And to go along with that, one of the things that we're very aware of is that if either Rosedale or DeBaliviere were opened up, you create the possibility of parking issues with people that are trying to use some of the entertainment facilities and restaurants and stuff along Delmar, and then, you know, using neighborhood streets to park. So we're very aware of that issue. And through our Metroquest survey, we didn't have a lot of comment on parking, but we know that some of these improvements could lead to parking issues. So we're definitely trying to keep that in the forefront and trying to make sure that we alleviate that before it would become a problem, or we don't want to create that problem.
So we have one more question queued up, Mike, about, and it's a little bit of a scoping question for you. Part of speeding going west on Waterman to Skinker is a 2-minute wait for a green light getting onto Skinker. So then it is green, it is people speed to make the green. Can someone review the signals, please? And so maybe it's a bit of like what our purview is here and what we can impact.
Sure, and I can tell you that, you know, the signal timing along there has been studied many times, and the way that the coordination of the signals is set up along Skinker has in the past been set up so that people are able to get out of the neighborhood and at least store on Skinker before, if they're going southbound, to go through Forest Park Parkway. Definitely an issue with the intersection of Skinker and Forest Park Parkway. You know, I think most of us know that intersection is over capacity. It has its own safety issues with pedestrians and bicycles, but from a vehicle perspective, it's definitely over capacity and has long queues that will sometimes, definitely in the peak hours, extend past Waterman, so that does create issues. So it's somewhat of a bigger issue, but it is a very valid concern. I'm not sure how to eliminate the speeding for somebody trying to catch a green light, other than, you know, some of the other improvements that we're already doing there to limit the speeding on Waterman.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions on the list, Mike, so I'll
Okay.
turn it back over to you or send us
Yeah,
off.
I'll just say, you know, looking, I have the Mentimeter pulled up on my other screen, and we have a lot of comments on those questions. And when we asked for, you know, locations or examples, and the page is full. So I think that's definitely good news for us. That helps us a lot. And it's just like the Metroquest survey where we got 400 comments, and they were all so valuable. You know, I think there was, out of 400, I think there was 3 that just either didn't apply or weren't actually in the neighborhood, but otherwise they were, you know, 99% on target of what we are trying to study. And from what I see tonight on Mentimeter, it's the same thing. And we're definitely take these questions that we're getting tonight too, and make sure that we go back and talk as a group to make sure that we are addressing them correctly, and that there isn't, you know, make sure there isn't more that we can do to address those.
Brian, I think we've got one more hand raised there.
Oh, did we? All right, there we go. Norb.
Yes, am I coming through?
Yes.
Yep, you're getting clear.
Could you go back to participation? And if you have it, convenient, fine. If not, I was interested what the participation rate was on 5900 Waterman, somewhat because we have a fair number and it's increasing of rental houses, and I doubt they would respond.
I do have some of that information that in the Metroquest survey, we did ask for people to identify if they were willing, what street they lived on. I don't have that handy at the moment, but I can go back and look at that location. I do know that our respondents were pretty well distributed across the neighborhood. It wasn't all from one area or from one street, or it was pretty well distributed. I can go back to the comments and see if we have any in that stretch. Sorry for my scrolling. And as you can see, I mean, along almost the entire stretch of Waterman, we have just a overwhelming number of comments, and you definitely can see kind of the groupings here. A little hard to see because there's so many comments, but the groupings here are really the intersections. This is Rosedale, and then a little bit to the east, you see a grouping at DeBaliviere, and then another big grouping at that triangle intersection of DeBaliviere, and then all the way over to DeBaliviere. If there's any other comments or questions, we definitely have time, and we'll stick around, and feel free to either submit them through the questions and answers on Zoom, or if you would like to ask it in person, we're definitely open for that too, whatever you're comfortable with.
Looks like people are dropping off. I just want to remind you guys the polling will be open for the next couple of weeks. Please share this with your neighbors, and we really appreciate your participation.
Mike, we just got a.
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask, where can people go to access this polling after today? Is there a link or something that we can send out and post?
I was about to copy it into there, which I can go ahead and do. Mike, we might want to make sure that gets to the city and gets out, in a bit more formal format, but I can grab it really quickly.
Yeah, and the city is recording this.
We'll post it on our website. I believe the link was included on the notice for the meeting.
And all the attendees that are still on should have just seen it pop up too, just in case somebody wanted to quickly do it.
Great, thank you.
And just talking about before, if anybody that's still on, if talking about next steps, this is a very valuable public meeting to gauge feedback and the temperature on some of the preliminary recommendations that we have and the draft improvements that we're proposing. Those will be put into a report that will be submitted to the city along with ranking them or prioritizing them as short-term, long-term improvements, which ones will have the most impact on improving safety, improving speeding issues as we've seen. So that will be coming soon. The Mentimeter also has a final question at the very end, if there's any questions. So over the next 2 weeks, if you come back and if you have a question or if somebody new takes it, they'll be able to provide questions through that platform.
Mike, do you want to answer more questions or?
Yeah, if they're there.
We're here for a while. Yeah. Okay.
We're here until 8.
We have I'm going to unmute Richard Bose.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi.
Yeah, do the street trees help calm traffic, and should we redouble our efforts to put them where they're missing?
Brian, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, I think I think absolutely street trees have the ability to do it. I would say dollar for dollar, or for impact, street trees reduce the speed that cars move quite a bit. It makes them feel like they're somewhere and they want to slow down almost purely because of that in a lot of cases. In terms of what we've been asked specifically to look at, we've been looking at a little bit more of the the roadway and the street improvements themselves, but and there is actually quite a good canopy generally, but there's probably some missing teeth for street trees here as well.
Yeah, there definitely are on Laurel near the bridge.
Letting us know that, sure, this would be great. So if you want to, on the Menti, put in specific locations where you're missing, that'd be great.
Yeah, maybe that's more directed at the Alderwomen to. I understand the process. A property owner has to ask for one. Am I right about that?
Can you ask that one more time, Richard?
That a property owner has to request a street tree. They don't just put them in as they please. Am I correct about that? This is more, I guess, directed at the Alderwomen than you all.
Yes, generally somebody has to make a request, but that's not the only. Yeah, somebody has to request it generally. And I've worked with forestry. Sometimes forestry will suggest like, hey, these are places we've removed trees in the last several years, so we have some gaps. Do you want to go ahead and replace those? So there's a couple of different ways it can happen, and that's something too that we could look at the neighborhood, go back to the neighborhood plan and identify gaps, and then work with neighbors to select trees and locations and that sort of thing. I think that would be a great idea. Thanks, Richard.
So Mike, we also have a question here, and I just lost it. It went somewhere. Thank you for the presentation. I know there's more work to be done. How soon could we realistically expect to see improvements to physically take? And I guess what would the process be to get to those improvements too? Might be add on to that. Yeah,
just to add on to what I was mentioning about our next steps, obviously trying to get that into a report that gives the city and the Alderwomen something to work from. And for our process, that's another few weeks to get that. And then it's helping to identify, what those costs are, for either short-term or long-term improvements, and trying to identify where those funds could come from for some of these improvements, depending on the type of improvement or the magnitude and size of them. I'll say too,
Yeah.
as we have more time, if anybody wanted to see a slide that we, may have rushed through or wanted to just look at again, while we have a few minutes, if I can always go back to something.
You may have already answered this question, but is this presentation going to be available, Mike?
Yes.
And where maybe? I can put it in the feed too if that helps.
I believe it's the same place Eric said that the notice for the meeting was.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat.
Perfect. Sorry, I may have not seen that pop
No,
up.
I just figured out how to do it while you were saying it.
Mike, I'm going to go up to this question that I'm realizing up top. We had someone second it. It looks like related to the Skinker Debaliviere community traffic committee or some type of thing like that. The question really is, would it help if SDCC started a traffic committee or something like that? That may be a question for you combined with the alders, and I don't mean to put people on the spot either, but just, I saw that one was seconded.
From my perspective, I think, it's probably up to the, to the neighborhood community council or to residents, but if it's something that people definitely feel strongly for and there's champions for, it, definitely can't hurt. And it can be maybe that first step of answering issue, especially after maybe we have our report. If somebody can always refer back to, you have somebody that can refer back to that of, this has been studied before, here's what was recommended, here's maybe the cost for improvements to address something that comes up from residents. But so that's kind of my feeling, is that it definitely can hurt, but you need a champion for it and to follow it through.
So there is a neighborhood development committee, which is what prompted, I mean, I shouldn't say that group, this kind of came out of, I guess, that committee identifying the priorities in the neighborhood plan. So I think, and I don't know if anybody from that committee is still on, but that's probably a good place to start. There already is an active group that has regular meetings and is following through. So I'll make sure, I mean, they're very aware of this, and I think some of the other issues that have come up tonight as well.
And they've been very helpful for us throughout this process too, and relaying specific concerns.
We have a question about the survey addressing the conditions of alleys. I'm just passing these right on to you, Mike. And
sure.
I just want to mention that the correct address is now posted.
Gotcha.
Sorry, Brian, what was the question about alleys?
Does this survey address the conditions of alleys?
Not directly. We have considered alleyways, and we did ask about them in the Metroquest survey. We didn't get many responses other than some of that cut through traffic or some speeding issues. I think somewhat of the common thought is if the more you pave and make alleys really nice, it encourages people to use them and to drive a little bit faster down them. But ultimately, I think the condition of either the pavement or the alley itself, I think, is more of a citywide issue. One of the specific locations we have looked at alleyways is, where the alley does enter a more major street. If there's a pedestrian crossing across that, is it a safe crossing? Is it something where somebody's going to come out of an alley and possibly hit somebody in a crosswalk? So that's more the focus of our study.
You all see Nicole Blumner's question on there about just any
Yep.
other examples of reopening streets. I think there'd probably be a lot of folks who would be interested in that one.
Absolutely. So Mike, we have a question about the team's experience with reopening closed streets in other neighborhoods and what was the result like?
That's something where, first I'll say that that's where Jennifer Pangborn has been very helpful, working nationally, looking at areas like that. Specifically locally, I was part of the project that did open up the street down in, that Nicole showed at Lucas and 2nd Street, and did see the effects of that and the reduced confusion that it provided. There's ways of doing it without increasing other issues, such as the speeding that we're seeing on some of these streets. So it's something that, needs to be addressed fully and thought through about what the effects could be. But we will attempt, specific to this question, try to find some case studies of similar neighborhoods, where they may have opened up streets and what the after effects were, so we can include that as part of our report. And Brian, you're definitely a good resource for that too. Without your experience, but specifically your city experience. I don't know if you have any locations.
I've made recommendations about places that should be open for sure. I think one of the things we found a lot of times is a certain long time ago, we basically said, hey, we need to close these streets off, right? We need to keep traffic on specific roads. We do that. What ends up happening is there ends up being crime and other kind of activities down at the end of those closed streets. So it sort of was like a double-edged sword for us. I think that generally, as long as you can kind of manage the traffic correctly and direct it to the main roads, I think opening up the streets does a good thing in terms of keeping people's walking, keeping their eyes on the street, keeping cars moving. It's one of those things where like it feels like there's going to be negative impacts, and a lot of times there's usually good impacts from opening it up. There were some examples along Gravelway where I think opening up onto Gravelway actually helped in several cases, but there were some cases where it didn't work so well. So I think it's sort of, if you do it the right way, maybe is what I would say.
Definitely. And I think we talk about opening, we mentioned before, it's opening to local traffic. We're not opening so that more people can cut through the neighborhood. That's definitely not something that we'd be trying to encourage or make an improvement, so that would lead to that type of problem. So
yeah, that's why I think an example, Laclede's Landing is interesting to look at, but it's clearly a commercial district where they're trying to get more commercial traffic in there.
Sure.
That's not what we're looking for here. We want connectivity, but not looking for an increase in traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that one, we did use because I had worked on it, and it had one component of it did reduce some of the confusion of how you get back into some of those streets. But I agree, it's not a residential neighborhood, so it's not a good, as much of an apples to apples comparison.
We do have a question on here too that maybe kind of relates to that. And I've never lived in Skinker Debaliviere. I know the neighborhood pretty well, but I've lived in the neighborhood for 2 years, and I don't know the history behind the survey. What is the bigger picture here? Traffic was fine until 20-something, then it got worse. Any insights you can offer? Any thoughts on why traffic's gotten worse in the neighborhood? If it has, Mike, do you notice that, or any of your work with the city?
My only thought to that is possibly people avoiding some congestion on either Skinker or Forest Park Parkway, if there has been an increase recently. I think obviously with COVID, I think a lot of traffic patterns everywhere have changed, but we started this before any kind of shutdown or due to the pandemic. So we did get to see some of this before that. I think like anything, it's probably problems that were there before and maybe not as noticeable, but they just incrementally get worse until enough people notice, or enough people actually come out and say something. And maybe that was like, in this case, we had some champions for it finally. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I certainly would just add and say, I certainly, like, since, when I first moved, I was moved to St. Louis in 2002, or 2003, if I'm not mistaken. But I mean, the entire other half of the loop going east did not exist. There was the pageant and there was nothing between.
Sure.
So certainly, I think that, you know, some of the good development and kind of revitalization of the loop itself has I'm sure contributed to more people wanting to be there and park there, which no doubt has pushed some cars into the neighborhood trying to park. You know, I mean, a lot of neighborhoods have other good models for managing that, like parking districts and other types of things that, you know, protect sort of the neighbors' rights to park while kind of, you know, the struggle between the commercial district and the neighborhood is like, that's like classic, you know, that's like the cat and dog kind of relationship. And the great, you know, from my perspective as the urban designer, they sort of both need each other, right? The neighborhood kind of really needs a commercial district and the commercial district really needs the neighbors to walk over and spend their money. So I think, again, it's how you design it and how you make it work right, which is a challenge. But I think the eastern half of the loop has, I mean, gosh, since 2002, I mean, it's just totally different.
That's a good point.
So just worlds apart. We did a long time ago, about 10 years ago, did a study, a public space, public life survey of the loop. And it was as part of the Delmar Loop retail strategy. And we could see people, we would track people and map where they walked, and we could see them walk to Skinker going east, and they would stop and turn around and go back. And now it's just people are flooding across both of the streets because it's almost, you know, starting to become seamless. The intersection's not ideal, but it's just that whole half of the loop has just changed so much, and you know.
And I'm sure that residents that have lived there, you know, a long time probably have better perspective than we do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a question here, Mike. If you open Debaliviere and Rosedale as you suggest, how do you limit traffic local only? Are there methods that we can use to make it local only?
I think first I think you open one or the other. You don't open both. And I think we most likely are leaning towards Debaliviere as being the better option, because while the whole neighborhood is residential, Rosedale is very, I mean, you're going right into the houses there, where Debaliviere is a little bit more of a major street, a bigger street than what Rosedale is. But I think you can do some things at that entryway to not make it look like you can get all the way through, when maybe you can. You know, you can definitely make it constricted right there with how wide the road is, you know, do some other, you know, the gateway elements, that kind of thing, to make it look like maybe it's only open access to the neighborhood, and that you may not know that you can go all the way through. There's like a couple things you can do, but ultimately, you know, public streets are public, and it's hard to limit local versus through traffic.
Signage at a basic level too, right, Mike?
Yep. You know, controlling speed so that it doesn't actually benefit somebody from cutting through is definitely a good way. Keeping those outside routes working well, keeping that signal timing working on those outside routes like Delmar and DeBaliviere and Skinker, that helps prevent people from wanting a path to cut through. And then making the path that does go through the neighborhood, you know, make sure, you know, you slow them down, don't make it as easy on them. So don't give them a reason to try to find that cut through. A lot of this, you know, falls into almost like human nature and psychology, and, you know, you almost somewhat have to trick people into, by using those visual elements and the different ways to control that natural behavior.
No open questions or hand raised at the moment, Mike. So I'll keep my eyes peeled.
And we just have a few minutes left. I mean, I'll stick around for the next 5 minutes, but definitely for the people that have stuck around, we appreciate your time tonight. We appreciate making the time for a virtual meeting, and we're all sorry that we can't do something fun in person and meet everybody. So hopefully one day we'll be able to.
Could I jump in with one last question?
Sure.
And I'm kind of curious to hear from the people who are still left on the call. I'm just in terms of how you heard about the meeting, especially with COVID, we were trying different ways, and we know that, people have differing access to the internet and to various technologies. If there's anything else we could have done to help get out the word, or if you know that there are other people who are interested in knowing about this, please, let me know. We've tried flyering in the past for different things. We put up the signs. I don't know if the signs were helpful this time around, but I would love any feedback you've got. If you can leave it in the chat, or I don't know if the Q&A is appropriate place, or email me, text me. Just would love to keep neighbors engaged in this way, and always open to new ways too. Thanks, Andrea.
I'll just answer this one. We had anywhere, it's obviously trailing off a little bit in the last 20 or so minutes, but we had, I think at the highest peak, somewhere between 63 and 65 people, and kind of that increased about 15 minutes afterwards. I think we got up to about 63, and then it sort of trailed off in the last 30 minutes. We've had about 40 for about the last 30 minutes, just answering Daniel's question.
Did you guys make any kind of visual boards or anything, just in case Heather or I get any calls for some reason that somebody just could not view it in any kind of form? Is there like a printout or boards or something that we might be able to get small groups together with?
Not yet,
Okay.
but we can put together a little handout that can be printed off.
Okay.
One of the things we had started to put together was those examples from other places in the city of similar improvements that have been implemented with the address or location, so that people, if they wanted to go drive or go view it, they could. So we'll have that along with some of like the composite map that I'm showing right now on there. So we can provide that to you.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Well, looks like we're at 8 o'clock, and I don't see any last minute questions getting snuck in. So do we want to call it a night?
Nice job.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll share the Mentimeter results with you and Shamim, and I think it's kind of impressive to see how much feedback was given.
Where's the word cloud? I want to see. I don't know where I love those word clouds.
Here, let me see if I can pull it up real quick. I got so many windows open. Yeah, that's when we had a little bit of the technical issues in the beginning, but people did keep filling that in. So.
I love their neighbors. That's good result.
Good.
And I apologize. We probably would have got more if we if that would have worked in the beginning, but some good ones.
More when other people fill it in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Those are all good things to have about a neighborhood too. It's, I don't think you could ask for much more than that.
Yep.
And just looking through some of the, we're asking about satisfaction, if we have addressed them. I think most of them were to the positive side. So, but I think the big thing will be going back and looking at those either locations or comments that people left, and we'll try to summarize those like we did the comments with the Metroquest survey, so it's digestible.
Okay. Oh gosh, that speed hump. Oh, did you hear the guy ask about the one speed humps, the ones that get soft and hard? Are those expensive? I was asking Heather if she had heard of them. Are they expensive?
The non-Newtonian fluid speed hump, Mike. You wanna take that one?
I didn't see that question.
I told him we'd enter it into the record, and I was very eager to enter it into the record.
Okay. I'll be curious to see what the wording on that one.
Listen, I had to look it up myself, and then I text Heather. I'm like, wow. How much those cost? That's cool if we could get something like that. I mean, that's we would definitely be the first in the city, I'm sure.
See if the street department buys off on something.
Part of me feels like I'd be out there a lot of times trying to touch it. Like, and I don't know if that's, I mean, there's a little bit of a conflict in there, but it's pretty cool. They're pretty cool.
Yeah, they look
Sure.
cool. I looked them up. They look really cool.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing, and appreciate everybody's time tonight and helping getting the word out. I think we, like Brian said, we had good attendance. So. Anything else before we wrap it up?
No.
Great. Thank you. Have a good night. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
See ya.